If you want to get a real snapshot of just how progressive the American press corps is, you should have been on social media last night as the voters in Kansas rejected an amendment to their constitution that would have stripped abortion language out of it. Kansas has a constitutional provision that allows, it basically makes abortion a constitutional right and allows state funding for it. And there was an amendment to the Constitution to strip it out. And the National Press Corps, the National Political Press Corps, was positively orgasmic last night that the measure failed. And they never bothered to ask themselves, wait a second, how did it fail in a place like Kansas? They should be asking themselves, how did a provision like this get in their Constitution in the first place? Why do they have a Democratic governor? The fact of the matter is Kansas has a moderate strain among its Republicans and always has. You cannot correlate a massive Democratic surge in November to this. In fact, a lot of the reporters who were so orgasmic about the abortion decision or the abortion vote in Kansas last night immediately jumped to, oh, thank God, the Republican wave. It's got to be at an end. They just, I mean, in Kansas, all these women turned out. Did you know the majority of new voters turned out after Dobbs? The new registered voters came out after that. They were all women. The Democratic wave is coming. I mean, you saw reporters, supposedly objective reporters. The NBC ones, by the way, were the worst. And in their ecstasy, firing up the orgasmatron of the votes, they totally missed what was going on. I don't want you to miss what was going on. There are a number of things you need to know about this vote in Kansas, and it's got to be the big story here today because the media absolutely, I looked this morning when I got up and started doing show prep, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, USA Today, the Miami Herald, the Chicago Tribune, I'm trying to think what else. Basically, every major outlet, CNN included, the abortion decision, the abortion vote in Kansas was the number one story. Top left, number one story. They totally missed what was going on here. There are a couple of data points. One of the biggest is that I think it still would have gone down in flames. But it went down in flames by substantial margins. That's what got everyone's attention. And part of the problem was the wording on the ballot. And interestingly enough, in the last month, there were multiple media stories about how confusing the language was. Let me read you what voters were voting for. Because this is the actual text that would go into the Constitution. Regulation of abortion. Because Kansans value both women and children, the Constitution of the state of Kansas does not require government funding of abortion and does not create or secure a right to abortion. To the extent permitted by the Constitution of the United States, the people, through their elected state representatives and state senators, may pass laws regarding abortion, including, but not limited to, laws that account for circumstances of pregnancy resulting from rape or incest, or circumstances of necessity to save the life of the mother. Let me walk you through this again because you do need to understand this because this is something the media has missed. That I have talked to plenty of pro-life groups who suspected this whole thing was going to go down in flames for the very reason that no one can understand what this is talking about. You're adding this language to the Constitution. Because Kansans value both women and children, the Constitution of the state of Kansas does not require government funding of abortion and does not create or secure a right to abortion. Wait a second. Does that mean the current Constitution of Kansas doesn't do that? Because this goes on to say that under this, the legislature may pass laws regarding abortion. I mean, that's the very next sentence. To the extent permitted by the Constitution of the United States, the people, through their elected state representatives and state senators, may pass laws regarding abortion. But wait. It just first said the Constitution of the state of Kansas does not require government funding of abortion. It does not create or secure a right to abortion. And now you're saying that now they can pass laws regarding abortion? What's going on here? That's the problem. I guarantee you a number of people who are pro-life but not plugged in read that and said, well, this adds an abortion right. The very first sentence says there's not one. And the second sentence says now we're going to give the legislature the right to pass laws to have abortion. That's one issue. The second issue is that you can't track partisanship to this issue at the state level. Mississippi a number of years ago had a personhood amendment. It would give the unborn fetuses a personhood right. And it failed, overwhelmingly failed. At the same time, Republicans swept everything in the state. Republicans swept absolutely everything. Massive Republican turnout, and that provision failed. So you can't correspond these. You know, down in Florida, they gave felon voting rights restorations, overwhelmingly backed by Democrats. It passed in the state. Republicans said to oppose it. It passed. Republicans won everything, but that passed. Ballot measures and partisanship don't necessarily correlate. So you had the confusion. You've also got the lack of correlation. You also had the fact that 60% of the vote in Kansas went to the Republican primary. So you actually had a more massive Republican voter surge than a Democratic voter surge in Kansas, and yet this happened. So you can't really say, well, obviously there's going to be a massive Democratic wave in November. Look at what happened in Kansas. Where did the massive wave in Kansas come from? Republicans, not Democrats. But then there's one more thing. So what? The whole point of the Dobbs decision is this. Without the Dobbs decision of the Supreme Court, this vote would not have been possible. That's all the pro-life movement ever wanted. Allow us democratically to have the discussion. Allow us democratically to be able to persuade. Do not preclude us by judicial fiat from being able to change minds. They did not change minds in Kansas. Part of it is the pro-lifers in the legislature, led by some zealots who were, from what I'm told by a lot of pro-lifers, duped by some supposedly well-intentioned pro-abortion activists who were willing to help them put this up for a referendum. They screwed up the language. The language overwhelmingly confused. Now, there was an explanation tied to this language on the ballot, and that explanation in and of itself suggested that there would be no ability to have an exception for rape and incest. It was hyper confusing. They willfully screwed up the language through a lobbying effort. But so what? The whole point of the Dobbs decision is not to ban abortion nationwide. It's to allow people to decide this democratically, and Kansas has decided it democratically. That's what we wanted. Now, if you're pro-lifer, you may be disappointed in the result. You should actually blame the people who wrote the language. That had a lot to do with it. The nebulosity of the language, including the suggestion that there would be no exception for rape and incest. I know if you're a diehard pro-lifer, you are opposed to the rape incest exceptions. You're opposed to it. I know a lot of people who are. It's a killer at the polls. You don't allow a rape and incest exception. Georgia passed its fetal heartbeat ban, and the only way it was able to get the votes was to put in a rape and incest exception. Some pro-life groups came out against the fetal heartbeat measure because it had a rape exception. Think about that. They would rather keep abortion than get rid of most of them because of the rape exception. The rape exception scares women because guess who gets raped in this country more often than not? It's not men getting raped. It's women more often than not. So the pro-life community is now going to have to realize that its principled positions have to face politics. But it was never allowed to face politics until the Dobbs decision. And that's what we wanted. The first test went for abortion supporters. We'll see how far out they go. You'll probably see referenda in states. I would advise the pro-life movement, you probably need to learn some lessons from this. One is you can't do a total ban on abortion. It's not going to work. You may want it, but it will lose. People would rather preserve the right and say, I just don't want one. I'm not going to have one, as opposed to taking away the right altogether. I warned you guys this would happen. I told you a lot of the people who claim to be pro-life, now that Roe v. Wade has gone away, would reveal themselves to have never really been that committed to the cause. And you're seeing that. The other thing you're seeing is just how willfully biased the press is against the pro-life cause. They cannot even bring themselves to acknowledge one of the issues in Kansas was the absolute obfuscation of the legislation, the absolutely muddied, watered down, weird language on the ballot. Literally, again, I want to read this for you. This is what they were asked to vote on. Because Kansans value both women and children, the Constitution of the state of Kansas does not require government funding of abortion and does not create or secure a right to abortion. To the extent permitted by the Constitution of the United States, the people, through their elected state representatives and state senators, may pass laws regarding abortion, including, but not limited to, laws that account for circumstances of pregnancy resulting from rape or incest or circumstances of necessity to save the life of the mother. What does that mean? If you are pro-life and plugged in, you probably knew. But in my experience, most of the people who show up even at primaries are not plugged in. They know there's an election. They want to do their part, but they're not plugged in. And the language was confusing. And you're not hearing that talked about in the media today. All they want you to know is that the pro-lifers were smacked down by everybody in Kansas. But the other thing you need to know is just how biased and hostile to the pro-life side these reporters exposed themselves to be last night. The number of NBC reporters from MSNBC to CNBC to NBC that I saw, the blue checks, who were positively, they're suffering from priapism, even the women, over the decision in Kansas last night by the voters that they just, it's been 4 hours. They all need to go to a doctor. The level of partisan cheerleading by the press on this issue shows you how the pro-life movement never gets a fair shake. The fact that they can't even do that. The fact that they're jumping ahead and extrapolating from Kansas to nationally in November is the other big problem here. 60% of the vote in Kansas went to the Republican primary, and a lot of those Republicans voted against this amendment, probably a lot of them because they didn't know what they were voting for. They were deeply confused and thought they were suddenly putting an abortion right into the Constitution. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. It was decided democratically. And if you are intellectually honest, members of the press exposed themselves last night as not being so. If you are, you need to acknowledge the whole point of the Dobbs decision was to settle abortion democratically instead of based on judicial fiat by 7 black-robed men from the 1970s. And that's a win for the pro-life movement.